A good Godzilla is one that you should be as sympathetic towards as you're terrified of. Over the 70 years Godzilla has been a character, he's been many things. A hero, a villain, a king, a father, a zombie, a politician, a giant rubber suit, a CGI monster, an icon. But above all else, Godzilla has always been a very complex character. That comes from being a character that's been in the movies for 70 years, and hopefully many more. And we're going to be taking a look at what makes Godzilla, Godzilla. And, more importantly, what makes a good Godzilla, a faithful Godzilla. You can have your serious Godzilla movies, things like -1, Return of Godzilla in '84. And you can have your admittedly very silly ones. Things like the gravity-defying dropkick in Godzilla vs. Megalon. And even sometimes they've been able to make both work in the same movie at the same time. Those two sides of Godzilla are not separate, and have actually been what made the character as iconic as it is. Because Godzilla really shouldn't be limited to being silly or serious, a hero or a villain. That's something that we, both the fans and Legendary and Toho who are making these fantastic movies, do need to keep in mind. He is both, he is all of them. And that is what we are going to be looking at today. So please don't forget to subscribe for more, everyone. This is the first video on the secondary channel. We are still work in progress for the name of it. I'm tentatively going with Maxis Allosaurus. We can go with Metallosaurus. We can go with a bunch of other ideas. I'm always looking for ideas from you in the comments, so leave your thoughts below. And let's get on to More Than a Monster, Godzilla. Godzilla is a character that I've been familiar with longer than I can even remember. We've seen his playful side. We've seen his wrathful, destructive side. We've even seen the parental, fatherly side, and the side of one grieving the loss of a loved one. In a lot of ways, Godzilla is almost a reflection of the best and the worst in humanity. He has even been so petty as to, when the literal end of the world is coming, to say, I can't be bothered with this, when it comes to fighting an alien from outer space. Some kaiju have unambiguously been good, have been heroes. Chief among them is Mothra. To a degree, Batra also fits in here, but Batra is much more of an aggressive, almost anti-hero-like character, where he is objectively on the side of good, as in the planet, but he does not mind wiping out humanity, if humanity gets in the way. At the same time, we've had unambiguously evil kaiju, things like Ghidorah, Space Godzilla, Gigan, and Desoltroya. But not Godzilla. There's actually been a fair number of Godzilla movies, in fact actually the vast majority of them, where he is both the protagonist and the antagonist, but without being necessarily a hero or a villain. Most of this goes into the idea that Godzilla is above the kind of petty concept of human morality, of good and evil. He is a true force of nature. He does not discriminate between good and evil, heroes and villains, he simply does. But they have had emotion with him. Even as far back as the original movie, where he is unambiguously a destructive force that is devastating Japan, he is portrayed in actually a very sympathetic light. In the sort of prologue for the movie, the pre-mutation Godzilla and many of his kind and family were actually living fairly safe, fairly normally under where the Castle Bravo tests were. When the H-bombs went off, they destroyed his home, his family. Everything he knew was gone, and he was mutated, changed into this giant destructive force. The story is one of him enacting his vengeance onto humanity for what happened. Other movies have very much painted him much more as the protagonist, saving humanity, albeit indirectly or deliberately, generally from an outside greater evil. That's why the idea of saying Godzilla is simply an allegory for nuclear force multiplication exponentiators, I have to say those words, is a bit of a massive oversimplification. That's why to say that Godzilla is simply an allegory for nuclear destructive capabilities is not only a massive oversimplification, it's an injustice to the character and the legacy of the character. Because for all he does embody the power, the destructiveness that they can bring, he is himself, in the end, just as much a victim, from even the very iconic design of his scaly hide, that is meant to resemble, well, skin during radiation sickness. On to a much more lighter topic, the combination of the silly and the serious Godzilla is something that actually has been shown to have been mastered by Toho, at least during the early years. And by early years, I don't mean the early days of the Showa era, I mean more towards the middle period of the Heisei era, and especially into the Millennium era. The stories of those movies were absolutely absurd. Everything from people traveling back in time to wipe out Godzilla before he ever existed, to a scientist creating a freak of nature monster because it was in a twisted way to save his own daughter. The movies completely played it straight-faced. They didn't flinch from the concept, as absurd as it was. They took it seriously, and showed that silly and serious aren't mutually exclusive. But as for Godzilla's much more protagonistic and heroic run, this began in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster. Prior to this, he was always portrayed as somewhat of a destructive force that either by unintentional destruction or a continued holdover from his vengeance against humanity would cause destruction to human structures. He would go in, destroy cities, but it was never the same forceful want to destroy as was had in the original movie. It was always simply a byproduct. With Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, this was still kept and did persist for a while longer. It was showing a much more outright heroic path Godzilla was taking, at least slowly at first, teaming up with Rodan or Radon and Mothra to face the evil space dragon Ghidorah that would have, well, destroyed Earth. But even this wasn't nearly as quick as you'd think. With this movie, as absurd as the scene is, we do get a lot more insight into Godzilla as a character, with Mothra's fairies, the Shobijin, I believe I'm pronouncing that right, actually translating the conversation between Radon, Godzilla, and Mothra. In the scene, Mothra's actually trying to convince Godzilla and Rodan to join up with her to face Ghidorah, essentially evil versus oblivion, or at least indifference to humanity versus oblivion. And again, for as absurd as the scene is, Godzilla tells Mothra the reason he won't save humanity. It's not because he hates humanity. It's because humanity, at least from his perspective, hates him. They come after him with their military and their bombs and their missiles, and they attack him simply for, in his perspective, existing. And while this would eventually lead down the road to Godzilla's much more outright heroic way, even working alongside humanity and working with humanity to save the world, this was the one scene that led to Godzilla's much more heroic turn. Again, as silly as this scene is, it does hold a lot of weight, at least for the character of Godzilla. It does explain a lot of his reasoning. It does explain, in few words, a lot of actual character development. Godzilla would have been before, he would have simply attacked on sight, and while him and Rodan actually outright say they would rather just keep fighting each other. It actually does show a fair degree of character depth in Godzilla, that he is incredibly intelligent, he understands, he just simply doesn't care. But this would lead to the much more playful side of Godzilla that the Showa era was either famous or infamous depending on your perspective for. But this does hide the very significant character growth and development in story Godzilla and metacontextually Godzilla went through. In Invasion of Astro Monster, once again Godzilla and Rodan team up to face Ghidorah, and this time they actually do so fairly willingly. Well, after the aliens bring them over to Planet X. Keep in mind, back in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, the two of them were basically being yelled at by Mothra to save the world, and their just body language was, I literally cannot be bothered with this, I just want to go back to hitting the giant pterodactyl, I just want to go back to hitting the giant dinosaur monster. They literally could not care less, and the body language completely sells all of that. But immediately fast forward to this, where they gladly work together, and after driving Ghidorah off back into space, Godzilla starts dancing. The victory dance Godzilla does is silly, it is preposterous, it is nonsensical. But it does show that Godzilla is no longer as hostile as he used to be. He hasn't forgotten what happened. but he is willing to essentially move on, sharing in their joint victory in celebration with Rodan. Something that was actually very consistent with Godzilla vs. Gigan, where when Gigan and Ghidorah came down to Earth to destroy everything from the Space Hunter Nebula M's call, Godzilla recruited Anguirus to assist him because he felt something was wrong. And he doesn't do this out of any love for humanity. He does this because Earth is his turf. And you might not be a monster I like, Anguirus, but at least you're from Earth. These guys aren't from Earth, and we gotta get rid of them. This gradual marching on of character development eventually led to Godzilla vs. Megalon, where not only does he save the world from aliens and the Cetopians who are actually native to Earth, but he works alongside a human-made robot, Jet Jaguar. This shows Godzilla actually maybe not coming to terms with humanity's existence, but a lack of deliberate hostility towards them to accomplish a greater goal. And after this, he has no malice towards humanity. He was no longer intentionally destroying cities. He was a protector at this point. The best way of really phrasing it is, as Overly Sarcastic Podcast said, a grumpy Captain Planet. Going back to the original, the core of Godzilla's identity, the embodiment of the power and the destructiveness, and the victims of such nuclear weapons power, that never was lost on Godzilla for very long. For as playful and kid-friendly as many of those movies did become, they would always come full circle into the origin of Godzilla. The original, I don't watch very often. For as great of a movie as I think it isn't really a movie I watch because it's not an enjoyable movie. It's one where you are horrified. It's one where you dread what is being seen. You do not rejoice when Godzilla smashes buildings in this movie like you do in many other films. And even on those few times I do watch that movie, I do get taken back to the first time I saw it, where I was watching this at midnight on a Saturday, wrapped up in my blankets I don't even remember how old I was when I saw it, but I was utterly terrified. And I still do get that fear. I still do get that creeping sense of dread that nothing else can really do for me. But the entire time, it is hard to argue with why Godzilla is destroying everything. He wasn't always a monster. We made him this way. And this core of the character is something that they reinvented very well with Shin Godzilla. He's not a hero or a villain, but he is the antagonist of the movie. He is not so much the protagonist in the sense as in you can understand why he is destroying things, as in this movie. He is the byproduct of radioactive dumping in the Tokyo Bay, mutating something that was there, and eventually went through many, many metamorphic stages, going from its first stage, which we never saw, to its second, third, fourth, and eventual partway into its fifth form. Making Shin actually have his origin in nuclear waste dumping rather than the detonation of the bombs is a much more interesting origin, at least from a characterization standpoint, because it doesn't give him this natural predisposition to want to destroy humanity. Rather, the reason he destroys, rather the reason all of this happens, is he is in constant pain, because he is a giant radioactive tumor that is constantly mutating. Anytime something hits him, something injures him, be it humanity fighting back against him in self-defense, he himself changes and mutates in self-defense, or it is the environment itself. He was adapted to being in the water, his nuclear reactor being designed to cool in water, but when he is exposed to the air, it needs to change. He's building up too much radioactive heat, and he has to flee back into the water so he can simply heal and save himself. He doesn't obtain the atomic ray until after they drop some pretty heavy ordnance on him. When they start dropping freaking bunker busters from US bombers. Then the laser beams come out. But the duality of Godzilla, not just the destroyer, was shown in a lot of movies. This much softer, from a giant kaiju monster's perspective, have been shown time and time again, I think best exemplified by Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, where Godzilla's primary motivation in that movie is the discovery of a Godzillasaurus egg, which is initially mistaken as a pteranodon egg by the humans, brought back to Kyoto. But while the humans are taking the egg back to Kyoto in the helicopter from Rodan's island, Godzilla shows up and begins to fight Rodan, leading to a mildly humorous scene of Godzilla choking out Rodan before delivering a pretty brutal curb stomping that nearly kills Rodan. The next time Godzilla shows up is after the baby has hatched in Kyoto, where he begins to destroy Kyoto. Why? Because humanity is in possession of a member of Godzilla's species. The Godzillasaurus egg that hatches is not actually related to Godzilla, it is simply another member of his species. He is being very protective of this creature, as well as in this movie, in this continuity, Godzilla is psychic, so he is able to sense the baby. And when Godzilla senses the baby is scared, he actually leaves. He realizes, or at least he's able to tell, that what he is doing, even if it is in the best interest of the newly hatched Godzillasaurus, it's not going to go well because it's scared. Showing a fairly significant degree of intelligence, just simply beyond the natural protective instincts of protecting a fellow member of your species. In the same movie, after Godzilla destroys Mechagodzilla 2, he goes over to collect the baby again. His previous rampage having scared it off, it's still terrified of Godzilla. But eventually, through the use of one of the psychics, Mikisagusa, they are able to convince the baby to go with Godzilla, that it needs to stay with his own kind. Leading to a very touching scene of Godzilla heading back out to sea after pretty viciously just destroying Mechagodzilla, heading back out into the ocean, and partway through leaving, Godzilla turns around to make sure the baby's following. And the baby steps out into the water and swims off with Godzilla back to Godzilla's home of Baz Island. You could easily interpret as Godzilla was just heading back home after he defeated Mechagodzilla if he just kept on walking. But he didn't. He turned around, checked to see if the baby was still following him. And in the end credits of the movie, you actually see Godzilla and the baby swimming back towards Baz Island. This time, the baby is actually much closer to Godzilla than it was before, implying Godzilla actually stopped or even slowed down his swimming just so the baby could catch up, because he didn't want the baby to get lost. Keep in mind, all of this is in a movie where Godzilla is ostensibly the antagonist. The movie is about a human-made mecha to fight Godzilla and protect Japan from Godzilla's destructive warpath. But yet, these are very protagonistic motivations. You have my family. I want to get my family back. And you are not going to stop me. And the movie even says as much, that they get why Godzilla is doing this. And they basically like, we do whatever we can to protect our own. This is something that actually makes Junior's passing in Godzilla vs. Destroya all the more heartbreaking, as Junior is adopted. When the fully grown Godzilla sees the no longer living body of Junior, who has grown into mostly adolescence, he roars in grief. There's an almost desperation of Godzilla giving away a lot of his radiation to try to breathe life back into Junior, and it doesn't work. After this, you see Godzilla as he is burning Godzilla here, where his nuclear reactor is beginning to melt down, a massive surge of power flare up through Godzilla. Throughout the entire movie, he is melting down. And I don't know if this was intended, but I always saw this scene as Godzilla has been suppressing the reaction from going out of control and causing the meltdown as much as he can throughout the movie so far. But his grief at seeing the loss of his adopted son makes him lapse in control for a second, because it's right after this scene you see a massive surge of power come up through Godzilla, and he has to basically release a burst of it, almost like he is in pain physically from the nuclear reactor going out of control. Again, Godzilla is a very complex character. Destroya itself is a movie where Godzilla is the hero, or at the least shown in a much more protagonistic sense. But ultimately, he is a destructive force that does exist on Earth. The opening of the movie is in fact him going and destroying Hong Kong. but he is shown very sympathetically in the movie that really all he wants is to protect Junior. And particularly the showing of Godzilla mourning and the absolute wrath he unleashes on Destroyer for doing this shows he is much more than just an aggressive creature. He is not a monster. On a much more lighthearted note after that depression fest, we have the much more outright heroic Godzilla, which began back in Ghidorah the Three-Headed Monster, but I feel is best epitomized in Godzilla vs. Gigan, where he recruits Anguirus to help him fight Gigan and Ghidorah, really just because Earth's his territory. Again, he's not really saving humanity because humanity does anything good for him and he wants to protect humanity, but rather Earth is his turf and we are helped by extension. Which, I like this area of Godzilla most. He is almost a necessary destruction to have that keeps balance on Earth. I always found the outright heroic Godzilla that will fight and protect humanity to be a lot less compelling, not the least compelling, but a lot less compelling, like in Godzilla vs. Megalon. It's great spectacle popcorn fest, with, seeing humans and Godzilla work together to save everything, but you do lose a little bit of that Godzilla only exists because humanity royally effed up. I mean, you see Godzilla, he fights a giant monster in a pretty epic, spectacular battle, they flee, everyone wins, and you celebrate with an awesome Godzilla weird dance number. Again, it's fun spectacle popcorn entertainment, and I do love it for what it is. Though even in Godzilla vs. Megalon, the reason Megalon is sent to attack the surface by the Cetopians is because humanity is detonating nukes. Yeah, I do like a bit more morally gray Godzilla like he is in something like Godzilla vs. Gigan, where it's sort of a necessity to have. At least with respect to many of the older movies. With the more modern monsterverse movies, they've absolutely nailed this. Godzilla is not humanity's friend, but he will fight in a way that will unintentionally keep humanity going, unless we step out of line, which, yeah, when we step out of line, Godzilla does deserve the right to smack us around and show us, yeah, no. I'm dominant life form on this planet. I'm top Kaiju. The more modern movies, or at least the more modern Toho movies that have really shown the much more gray version of Godzilla are things like the Millennium era. Godzilla 2000 Millennium and Godzilla Final Wars, I feel, best epitomize this, where he will gladly destroy the big bad, and once he's done, he'll go back to rousing Tokyo into the ground in a sea of nuclear fire. Again, because Earth is his turf, you don't come into his turf and try and take over, he will obliterate you. Final Wars depiction actually did this the best, with Minilla actually having to convince Godzilla not to keep destroying the humans after he finished off Monster X, or, well, Kaiser Ghidorah, and the two of them just headed back out to sea. Showing that Godzilla was definitely not happy about being trapped in ice for who knows how long, and definitely still wanted revenge on humanity for that, but he was at least caring enough about Minilla to let humanity live a while longer, and maybe let bygones be bygones for now. Again, Monsterverse did a great job of this. We have a whole video going on specifically the scene of Godzilla rising from the depths after Saturda's sacrifice. That coming out in a bit, but that scene does a lot of the same that this scene does, just without Minilla. But then there are the Godzilla movies where he is outright the villain. This is your -1. This is your GMK. This is Dark Godzilla at his darkest, grimmest, and most violent. This is another project we actually have an entire video on, as I do have a lot more thoughts to say about specifically -1. As I do have a lot more thoughts on specifically -1 and GMK specifically, but we're saving that for that project because this is really more about a Godzilla itself. GMK kind of took this to the absolute logical extreme, GMK being Godzilla, Mothra, King Ghidorah, Giant Monsters All-Out Attack, but GMK is just a lot shorter. Where in that movie, Godzilla is not what you really think he is. In that movie, he is actually a supernatural entity, reanimated by the souls of those slain because of Japan during World War II, and coming back to exact vengeance on Japan. Which, if you know about Japan during World War II, they did a lot of messed up stuff. Again, not going to go into that because that is beyond the scope of this video, but even that aggressive Godzilla at least does have a somewhat valid justification for his wrath he unleashes. Now, I love GMK. This was probably the second Godzilla movie I ever saw when I was younger, and I really wish I could find the frickin' VHS tape that I recorded this movie on. But I love this movie. This is just spectacle nonsense fun at its greatest. And I really applaud the creativity of trying to reinvent a character as iconic as Godzilla almost 50 years after his initial introduction. But I don't find villainous Godzilla to be a particularly compelling character, because it kind of misses the whole point of Godzilla in that he is very sympathetic. You do need to be horrified of him and terrified of him, and you are terrified of Godzilla in GMK. He is a single-minded monster force of destruction in this movie. But a bit of that sympathy, or at least most of that sympathy, is kind of lost when he delights in the destroying of the soft, squishy human things. But it is a popcorn fun entertainment movie. Seeing him fight Ghidorah, seeing him fight Baragon, seeing him fight Mothra and the human people is very spectacular. And I do it that I actually have the humans beat him, or at least partially beat him. The sort of odd part of the movie is, despite Ghidorah being in the movie, Ghidorah is actually the hero, and Godzilla's characterization is actually far more in line with a traditional Ghidorah portrayal, or something like a Destroya or Space Godzilla, who is just an outright destroyer. But I do like the human characters. It is one of the Godzilla movies that does show you can have good human characters in a Godzilla movie. Is it bad that, despite the fact that I think this is not a great version of Godzilla, I actually do really root for Godzilla in this movie? Just me? Okay, just checking. Again, -1 does a lot of things differently, and again, that's why we have the whole separate video on -1, but something like what GMK did, you do lose a little bit of that moral complexity thought about Godzilla when he is just an aggressive, single-minded monster of destruction that literally lives for nothing more than to destroy everything. But it also is a movie that does get me to root for the humans just as much as I root for Godzilla sometimes. And as we kind of touched on last, is reinventions of Godzilla. We sort of peppered this throughout the entire video so far, but this is the section really on reinventions of Godzilla. And I think the Monsterverse has done a fantastic job of this. His origin is expressly not linked to humanity in this movie. Instead of being an ancient creature that was mutated by humanity's utilization and mishandling of nuclear power, he has simply always been. Again, really leaning much more into that idea that he is a force of nature, rather than a mistake and byproduct of the Castle Bravo tests. With his origin being he always was there and that he is from a line of apex super predator kaijus, it gives him no natural predisposition to want to destroy humanity, which does make him a much more favorable character. You can see him in a more protagonistic light, but you can also have him destroy humanity and, level cities, and not really be as, this feels out of character because we simply are nothing to him. Once again, he isn't good or evil, he simply is. He doesn't bother with humanity because humanity is nowhere on his, basically, radar of things that matter. He's just defending his territory. It just so happens his territory is all of Earth, and that can unintentionally lead to him protecting humans. If something challenges him, if that is humanity, he will not hesitate to lay the smackdown, as we saw when Apex Cybernetics was screwing around with trying to make Mechagodzilla. But he only destroyed Apex Cybernetics facilities, not the rest of humanity. An understanding he showed when, after Serizawa revived him, in Godzilla King of the Monsters, one of my absolute favorite scenes in the entire series, where Godzilla rises from the deep after Serizawa revives him, he does another intimidation display on humanity, breathing the atomic breath into space, dispelling the clouds, and would go and intimidate humanity, showing, I'm still here, I'm stronger than you, I will deal with you after we face the three-headed space dragon. Don't forget that. The mannerisms he has scream, we are not done with this yet. I just have bigger things to worry about than you. Something that shows he is incredibly intelligent. Something that Mothra's connection with Godzilla actually shows even further. Mothra is preservation of nature. Mothra is objective, undeniable good in every installment she is in. And that she allies with Godzilla shows, even if indirectly, Godzilla will protect the Earth, as in the planet Earth. not necessarily soft, squishy humans, even if Mothra actually does value humanity, as humanity is a natural part of the Earth, despite how destructive we can be. But despite the fact that she's actually significantly weaker than Godzilla, she's not above calling him out when he needs to be called out, as Godzilla Kong the New Empire showed in a fantastic scene. Wish I could use the footage here, but can't. All I can say is that scene is great, as it again shows a lot more depth to Godzilla as a character, that he really just likes to fight things. Even if it is for the greater good, he still loves to fight. He is painted very, very heroically here, but he does have, while not quite villainous moments, he does have his very antagonistic moments. Things like the fight scene on the ocean in Godzilla vs. Kong, and it lends itself very well to scenes where Godzilla is rampaging through cities while fighting other monsters. It doesn't feel out of character because he doesn't care about humanity. He's just fighting the thing he needs to fight. Our buildings are kind of an irrelevant thing, but they can be a little bit handy for Godzilla, like when he wants to take a nap in the Roman Colosseum, and it lends itself to some great spectacle fights that don't feel out of place, things like the Hong Kong fight scene in Godzilla vs. Kong. At the same time, it lends itself to some pretty silly and fun moments. Things like Godzilla just slamming Ghidorah through the building in Boston in King of the Monsters, or as mentioned, the Godzilla taking a nap in the Colosseum. And things like after the fight against Mechagodzilla in Godzilla vs. Kong, he shows respect to Kong for his, well, tag team fight against him, but also the fact that he put up resistance against Godzilla enough to earn his respect. Godzilla won 2 of the 3 fights against Kong in that movie, so he knew he could take Kong in a 3rd fight. He just simply chose not to because 1, Godzilla was tired, and 2nd, again, Kong did earn Godzilla's respect. For now, at least. He was safe for now. But you come back into Godzilla's turf, he will not hesitate to smack you down. Monster vs. Godzilla is by far the best all-encompassing Godzilla to bring in a lot of the silliness and a lot of the seriousness, and bring in a very intelligent, very multi-dimensional version of Godzilla. One where his aggressiveness is very justified, he is trying to assert his dominance over the other kaiju of Earth because he is the strongest, and after Ghidorah usurped him, a lot of the other monsters think maybe they can challenge Godzilla. And you just get this grumpy dad disposition from Godzilla. He is just tired of all of these monsters trying to step out of line, and he's gotta put the youngins back in their place. But the only part of Godzilla we've really yet to see is the much more parental side of Godzilla. Hopefully if they bring this in, they don't go with Manila, but they instead bring in maybe baby Godzilla like they had in Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. The only real issue with Godzilla in the MonsterVerse movies is they did just make him a bit too strong. Because it's kind of hard to make a compelling story where Godzilla can literally bulldoze everything in a few seconds and still have a relatively long fight scenes that actually make sense, which is why you follow Kong in the movie and Godzilla's a little bit out of focus. But who knows, maybe with the primordial kaiju, we'll start to see Godzilla meet his match. Or just bring in the aliens. But you all knew that this was coming. Godzilla 98. Or Zilla. We do need to talk about this. I feel it would be a bit of a disservice to not talk about this version. This is a very bad representation of Godzilla for a long, long list of reasons. It misses the main point of Godzilla in that he cannot be harmed by a traditional force multiplication explanation message, as it misses the main point of Godzilla cannot be harmed by traditional conventional systems used by the military. And it is ended by puny missiles. He is not nearly as large, he is not nearly as imposing, he's not nearly as intimidating. He does lack his iconic atomic ray, and a whole lot more that I really am not going to go into right now, as that is saved for another project we're working on. But that being said, even as a bad representation of Godzilla, it is not in every way flawed. There actually are but there is a few parts of this Godzilla that they actually did get right. One of them being the fundamental incompatibility of Godzilla with humans. As in, the main conflict is the two things cannot exist in the present way that we are. This non-malicious incompatibility is kind of what drives the entire story. That it was instead simply French Polynesian nuclear testing that mutated an iguana into Godzilla. I do applaud the attempt to reinvent it, even for as bad of a reinvention as this was, again, completely missing the point of Godzilla. I do at least applaud the attempt. Godzilla only becomes outright malicious and aggressive towards humanity after we destroy Madison Square Garden, where Godzilla's nest is, giving Godzilla a reason to actually destroy humanity. In a lot of ways, this actually does make this Godzilla's characterization fairly similar to the original Godzilla in the part of the story we actually never got to see. But again, it misses the conventional weapons do not harm Godzilla, and this thing still gets beaten by conventional weapons. So, problem. Maybe it's I just have a bit of a soft spot for this movie because I actually did watch it a whole lot when we were going up to my grandmother's cottage. We'd watch it on the road trip there and the trip back because we didn't have cable there. So I did watch this movie quite a bit. And the Godzilla, the series TV show that followed up on it, I also did heavily enjoy. So maybe it is I do have a bit of a soft spot for that. But I do think everything does deserve its criticism, and I do at least think at least some of its points do deserve a little bit of defending, even if, yes, this is not a very good depiction of Godzilla. It is not completely horrendous, though. But I did like things like it was shown attacking the fishing boat as it was looking for food. I do like that, at the very least, for as goofy as Matthew Broderick's character Nico Tatopoulos was, I do like that he was a human that was genuinely interested and curious about Godzilla, to respects Godzilla, or at least this version of Godzilla. Which, in a Godzilla movie, I think is what you need most from a human character. Someone who maybe not is fond of Godzilla, but someone who is interested in Godzilla. Someone who will show Godzilla the respect it does need, and it does deserve. As a monster, as a character, there is a lot you can do with Godzilla. And you can't really separate the story from the character, and you can't really separate the character from the story. We need silly Godzilla, as goofy as dancing on Planet X is, just as much as we need dark, serious Godzilla. We as the fans do need to respect and acknowledge both halves of this, as that is what made Godzilla as iconic as he is. But it is not just us that does need to respect this legacy. So does Toho, and so does Legendary. After all, some of my favorite Godzilla movies were the Heisei films, and some of the Millennium films, where they combine this over-the-top absurdity with straight-faced, relatively grim telling of those rather absurd stories. You have Godzilla vs. Biollante, where a father who lost his daughter, in his misguided grief, combines Godzilla's DNA with a rose bush that, because again psychics exist in this timeline, contains the consciousness, or at least he believes the consciousness of his daughter. And after that plant is going to no longer survive because it was damaged, because the people attacked his lab, in his desperation, he incorporates Godzilla's DNA into the rose to hope Godzilla's regenerative healing factor can save the plant. Unintentionally, this creates Biollante. Godzilla vs. Ghidorah has time travelers from the future coming back to destroy Godzilla by traveling back to World War II to remove Godzillasaurus from the island that the H-bomb tests were on, preventing him from getting mutated and allowing Japan to become the most powerful country in the future. Yes, that is a story that is told, and they tell it straight-faced, and it works. You have Godzilla vs. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, which is the Millennium Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla story, where they raise the original Godzilla's skeleton, build a robot around it to fight Godzilla. And the soul of the original Godzilla possesses Kiryu and makes it rampage and destroy things. And again, it's very absurd, but also there is a grim, or at least a very dark, serious nature to these, in that the soul of the original Godzilla still wants to destroy humanity. That it is still humanity's mistakes that lead to what we get. And then there's Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, where humanity literally builds a black hole cannon to try and destroy Godzilla. And it just doesn't work. And it creates a time machine that allows the Megaguirus to come to the future. And again, it's all absurd. But there is a there is a darkness to these stories that they don't flinch from the silliness. That the best Godzilla is the best Godzilla stories are the ones that can combine the silly and the serious. Just as the best Godzilla, the character, is the ones that can combine the sympathy for the character and the terror of the monster into one. The Monsterverse has done a fantastic job of showing this pure joy, and while they could definitely stand to err on the side of working a bit more on the human characters and making things a little bit more serious, I do love those movies. I would more than gladly grab a bucket. I would more than gladly get a bucket of popcorn. That's the reason I bought this thing. Go sit down and watch those movies day in, day out, because there is a pure joy that I get from those movies. But that is not to say I do not enjoy the much more serious Godzilla movies every once in a while, and those do work for a number of reasons. The recent successes of -1 and even the historic fondness that Shin Godzilla has shows that the original movie's nature still has a place today. But we mustn't let Godzilla go down the route of pure silliness and camp and have it turn into what the Transformers is these days. Just as we can't allow Godzilla to go down the road of dark grimness and become the DC movies. We need the fun, we need the serious, and both play off each other extremely well. Where Godzilla goes from here is really anyone's guess. That's what we're going to be talking about a lot more on this channel. Talking about the movies, the monsters, in a much more one-on-one basis, some more discussion-related videos, movie reviews, talking about the TV shows. But as for the future of Godzilla, really all I want to see is good movies. I want to see good kaiju fights. I want to see faithful or even good quality updates to the characters I've grown to love over the years. This is our second channel. The other channel, Maxis, is focused much more on gaming. This channel is going to focus much more on discussion videos, video essays, again, movie reviews, and really explanation videos of a number of characters from a lot of the series I love. Again, name is still up in the air, either Maxis Allosaurus or Metallosaurus. I want to work in Allosaurus in there somewhere, because after all, the Allosaurus is the real brains behind the operation. The other name for the channel actually was Kaiju Defense Force, or KDF, which was taken from my own monster stories that I've been writing, but maybe not going to go with that one as it is a bit too specialized. But subscribing is greatly appreciated, as well as support on the gaming channel as well. We've got a lot more projects coming up in the future, things focusing on the best serious Godzilla moments, the best silly Godzilla moments, and why we need them, and the ones focusing on the most terrifying Godzilla moments, as well as many other projects that we have mentioned throughout this story. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't done so already, thank you very much for watching. Please leave your thoughts, comments below. Every single one of you guys helps make this the greatest thing it possibly can be, and it means the world to me personally. Well, I'd say I've been named, but I don't know the name of this channel yet. And I will see you next time. Long live the Kaiju King, everyone.